Blog Talk Radio.
A student threatened with incarceration for mentioning Jesus in a speech. Students stopped from handing out church invitations at school, and the state government attempting to regulate what seminaries can teach? Is this what is really meant by separation of church and state?
Welcome to EIE Radio, equipping, inspiring, and encouraging Christians to stand for truth and reach the lost. And now here's your host, Neil Hess.
Alright, welcome back to another episode of the EIE Radio broadcast, encouraging, inspiring, and equipping Christians to stand for truth and reach the lost. And I have a special guest today, Neil Mauman, who's joining me from California. And before we get to talking to Neil, I just wanted to go over those three things we're talking about in the introduction here. So you can find this document that talks about these three cases at religiousHostility.org. And I wanted to talk about this because as we get closer and closer to the election, political issues are becoming more and more prominent. And along with that I have seen a lot of more aggressive stances taken against the expression of faith in public, and I just found a few examples here that were pretty striking. So this is from, the first case here is from Schultz versus Medina Valley, and this is Angela Hildebrand, the valedictorian of her class, wanted to say a prayer during her graduation ceremony from Medina Valley High. A fellow student from an agnostic family filed a suit to prevent Hildebrand from praying. The Federal District Court judge issued an order prohibiting Hildebrand from using words like Lord, in Jesus' name, and Amen. And then the second case I wanted to talk about was the Texas school prohibits students from handing out invitations to church event. And this was in Nederland, Texas. The public elementary school prohibited a third grade student, a third grader. Now this isn't like some massive protest or anything like that. This is a little third grade kid, a 9-year-old kid, distributing invitations to a church event, and the student's father filed suit on his son's behalf, but the suit was dropped when the school district agreed not to discriminate against any religious or non-religious private student-to-student speech as long as the speech does not disrupt educational activities. And the last one was a Texas case here, and this case in Texas was HEB Ministries versus Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board in 2007. Texas passed a law forcing all seminaries to get state approval of their curriculum, board members, and professors. 10 seminaries was $170,000 by the state for using the word seminary and issuing theological degrees without government approval. A suit had to be filed to prohibit the government's attempts to control religious training. Both the district court and the Court of Appeals upheld the law. Finally, after 9 years of suffering and losses, the Texas Supreme Court reversed and held that the law violated the First Amendment and the Texas Constitution. Now, something I want to emphasize here is that if you look at these cases, people would come against them, but eventually, after going through the court system, many of these cases, they do find justice and the First Amendment is upheld. And that's why I think it's really important for us not to just, roll over and go, oh, well, battle's over, we've lost, but to really stand up and say, hey, no, this is not right. And the law will side with us, eventually if our case is just. And then to bring in, I wanted to bring in an expert on this topic, Neil Mauman. Neil is the author of Jesus is Involved in Politics. He's the founder of No Blind Faith Ministries, and he has a number of other books he's done. And so, Neil, thank you for coming to the show. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
And so, Neil, I just wanted to get a little insight into your background. So I wonder if you could just explain for us what your background is like, where you're from, your experiences growing up, things like that, with regard to religious beliefs and government, things like that.
Well, I was born in Ghana, Africa, and I grew up in Yemen, Sudan, Ethiopia, and Jamaica, and India. My parents are of Indian origin, and my dad was a professor in physics. Used to travel to different universities and teach, and so I had the opportunity of growing up in all these different cultures, different religious environments, and also different political environments. So I had a very interesting childhood, I have to say.
Yeah, and so the relationship between the religions and the government in those areas, how would you compare them to the relationship between religion and government in the United States? You know, and we hear about these crazy right-wing Christians trying to impose their views on the masses and a theocracy and stuff like that all the time. But what has been your experience comparing America with, you know, the other countries that you've lived in?
Well, in general, obviously we know America has the most freedoms, probably the most freedoms that for everyone. Now, if you look at, for instance, Europe, they actually have a few more freedoms, but they actually do start clamping down on the Christians in Europe, because there's a lot of things that you can't say in Europe. You get thrown in prison for them. Recently, there was a pastor, I shouldn't say a young man, he was an older pastor named Ake Green, who was thrown in prison for reading from Leviticus in Sweden, I believe, just because it was a passage about homosexuality. So there's you'll see this swinging. But so let's start with Islamic countries. Most Islamic countries, as you know, it's illegal to share your faith, or in fact, in many countries, it's illegal to be, or it's dangerous to be a Christian. It's not always illegal to be a Christian, but it's dangerous to be a Christian, and it's illegal to convert. And where we were living in Yemen, where it wasn't illegal to be a Christian, but it was illegal to convert someone. And if you were actually caught witnessing to somebody, you could get thrown out of the country, which is what eventually happened to us. My dad was actually thrown out of the country because a friend of his borrowed a Bible from him. A Muslim friend borrowed a Bible from him, and circumstances led to them deciding that my dad needed to be kicked out of the country, it's a long story, and I actually talk about it in my book, Jesus is Involved in Politics. Why aren't you? Why isn't your church? So that I go into some detail into that. But from there, we go into India, and India actually has a lot of religious freedoms because there are many religions. But if you happen to live in a population that is mainly Hindu, we've heard of persecution of the Christians under the Hindu majority. So we've seen that, and the government seems to be, they're definitely not encouraging it, but at the same time, if you have a local police chief who kind of doesn't care or turns a blind eye, then these things will happen. And then you come all the way over here to the United States, where we have religious freedoms. A lot of people don't realize that's very tenuous. And a lot of people are, they say, well, we don't want the religious right, we don't want a theocracy. Well, let me assure you, Christians don't want a theocracy either. I mean, the last thing a Presbyterian wants is a Baptist government. The last thing an Episcopalian wants is a Baptist government. For crying out loud, the last thing a Baptist wants is a Baptist government, right? I mean, we don't want anybody telling us what to do when it comes to what we call ceremonial issues, how to baptize or when to baptize or things like that. We don't want anybody teaching us our theology. But we do want a Christian government that is based on Christian moral principles. And the reason I say that is because we believe that Christian moral principles are based on what we call the natural law. And the natural law goes way back to, you can even go back before Christ, where Cicero said, the philosopher, a contemporary of Julius Caesar, said, it seems to me that if you do certain actions and it causes disease and death, that means it's actually probably a bad thing to do. And by just studying the things that cause disease and death and pain, I can come up with a law. And he didn't call it, he didn't name it anything such, but I could come up with a law, which is what we call the natural law. And so later on, philosophers realized that this was what we call the natural law. Now, if you look at our Declaration of Independence, it calls out this natural law. It says that we believe, it basically affirms the concept of the laws of nature and nature's God. Meaning, and Cicero said, if God had created the universe, or gods, he was a polytheist. He said if gods have created the universe, then they would have created in a certain way. And certain things that they created would be good, and certain things that if you disobeyed it, it would be bad. And so he came up with this concept that God had created a way. Now, move forward to the time of Christ, and philosophers said, God has created, God, singular, has created the universe in a certain way, and there are certain natural laws, and these natural laws are the laws that God gives us. Now, if you go back into the Bible and you look at all the laws that God has given us, those laws that God has given us are all laws that help us. In fact, if you talk to somebody who says, well, I don't need all that repression or oppression or guilt trip from being a Christian. I don't want to obey all those laws. Well, why was those laws given? I mean, if you walk out here and you look at a stop sign, you go, well, I don't want to stop that. That's an oppression of my rights. I want to be able to drive. Well, why was that law put there? Why is there a law that says you have to stop at a stop sign? Well, it was there to protect us. In the same way, all of God's laws and all of the natural laws are there to protect us. So what Christians want is not a theocracy. What we want to legislate the natural law into our legal law, into our legislative law where necessary. Not all laws need to be legislated. In fact, we think we have far too many at times. So, but where Christians are interested in legislating is the moral issues, and the moral issues are protection of life, protection of the family, and protection of individuals' property. So these are the three things.
I just wanted to interject real quick. So, and this is something I've thought about too. Now, we obviously have to balance out moral laws or moral freedoms and religious freedoms as well. Let's say there's some crazy new religion that comes around and they say, okay, well, our religion says it's okay for us to, and hopefully this never happens. I'm not wishing this, obviously, but let's say this religion say, you know what, it's part of our religious right that we have to commit a rape once a year. At what point do the natural moral laws overtake the quote-unquote religious freedoms that the country would have? Does that make sense?
At every point. At every point. There is no time when a natural law would... See, as Christians, we believe the natural law is equal to God's law. Mm-hmm. And if we run into a natural law that seems to violate God's law, then we need to really go back and understand what we think, our understanding of that law. But it's always very clear that murder and rape and these things are against God's natural law and nature's law. So I don't think there's ever going to be a situation where that comes up. And in fact, that's never been an issue. Where right now the argument is about homosexuality. They say, well, we have natural life to get married, but what they're forgetting something completely. This has got nothing to do with natural law. Natural law has nothing to do with marriage. Yeah. Marriage is a legislative law about protecting the family. And the only reason that we would want to legislate marriage, otherwise why should the government get involved in marriage? It's not the government's business. The only reason the government is involved in marriage is because the government has a vested interest in the family structure. Yeah. Otherwise, the government should stay out of that business. So the only time the government should interfere is if it has a vested interest in preserving society in a certain way. So the reason that we preserve, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, is that the only purpose of government is to protect the rights we already have. Not to give us rights, but to protect the rights we already have. And so some of those rights are property rights. So if I make a contract with you, then the government should step in and uphold that contract. Why? Not because it needs to for its own preservation, but it needs to because its job is to preserve society, right? So it's indirectly to its own preservation, but so you want to observe contract laws. Well, the same way you want to observe marriage laws. Why? Because it preserves the society. So now the argument to the homosexual community is, you tell me why it is a good thing for same-sex marriage to be legal. Now, give me a good argument. Oh, because we have the right to do it? No, that's not good enough. You have the right to do a lot of things that we don't legislate for or against, right? The government's interest is in what interest is it of the government for you to be able to marry. Now, give me a good reason. There is no good reason for them, and they can come up with all sorts of, they've come up with all sorts of excuses, but they fail the good reason explanation, and there's no evidence. In fact, the evidence shows that it's bad for children. Children need a mother and a father. And so marriage, as far as the government, to the same-sex couples, I say, while I disapprove of it, you should, if you want to get married in your church and your church is going to do that, go get married in that church. You just won't get a legal document, a civil document. But they say, well, what about rights, about visiting rights, what about things like, visiting in the hospital or wills. And the answer to that is you can do all that with a $10 will. You can write a will for $10 and cover all that. You want to visit somebody in the hospital, well, have them write a will while they're not dead or while they're not sick, saying that you can visit them. You want them to be able to dispose of your body when you die. Well, write it in your will. There's no problem. It's been done for centuries. It's still done with people who are not married who are living together, right? Yeah. So I see there's no real good reason for that. The only one good reason I've come across was, well, if somebody dies, I don't get their Social Security benefits. Well, back to the thing again. First of all, there is no good reason. That's, again, the government getting involved. There's no good reason for the government to give Social Security benefits to someone unless it's in the interest of taking care of kids, raising kids the proper way, right?
Yeah.
Well, in the case of same-sex couples, there is good reason why we don't want same-sex couples to raise kids.
And this is, I would love to address this topic again. I want to kind of get back to the
back to the government and politics.
Yeah. So, but I would definitely.
But you can see it's a loaded topic, as you know. All these things are tied into this whole thing of Christians being involved in politics.
Absolutely. That's why I think this is so critical that we have a proper understanding of it. Because, and here's what I'd like to hear from you. Like, can you compare and contrast what I guess pop culture says about separation of church and state versus what the founding fathers' idea of the concept meant? Can you kind of compare those?
Yeah. One thing that people sort of forget about is that there's a lot of misunderstanding of what the intention was, right? And so, I mean, sorry, what they forget about is that there isn't a lot of misunderstanding about the intention. Because they'll say, well, first of all, let me make a statement here. We need to go back. If we're going to look at laws, we have to go back to the original intent of the law. We can't make up new reasons for the law. And let me explain precisely why this is so important. Imagine that your father had a company, and in his company he made a contract with all the partners, and then he died. Can you now take that contract that he had with his partners, go to a judge and say, hey, judge, I don't like this contract. I want to rewrite it the way I feel like writing it? Well, that would be wrong. That would be illegal. That would be unethical. Well, the United States Constitution and our laws are a contract with the people. How dare judges go and reinterpret it? They should go back to what the original intent of what the founding father was in the case of the Constitution, and what each individual law, look at the original intent and look at what it was meant. Now, but somebody will say, what if it was a bad intent? Well, if it was a bad intent, then we change the law through the amendment process. You come up with a new contract. You don't just arbitrarily change the contract any way you want. And the amendment process is a long, tedious process for that purpose. So let's look back at what the original intent of the contract was on the First Amendment, right? The First Amendment. So let's go back. And people say, well, how do we know what they intended? Well, that's because they don't know their history. If you go back, you'll see that it's well documented. Almost every line of the Constitution was argued about at some point. People argued about it, and Madison would actually make notes, right? So here's a note about the First Amendment. Okay, here's Madison's notes. Here it goes. Mr. Sylvester of New York had some doubts. He feared the First Amendment might be thought to have a tendency to abolish religion altogether. See, this is what everybody says is the First Amendment abolishes religion, right? Because it says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So there's just the first part we care about. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Go ahead.
And just for reference sake, where these Madison coming from? Obviously, we're talking about the First Amendment, but you're talking about these side notes, as I understand it. Is that correct?
These minutes, okay. I will send you the email, but it's basically it's a document put together in 1834, Volume 1. It's called Washington, D.C. by Gills and Seaton, Volume 1, and I'm referring specifically to pages 757 to 759. It was actually written down August 15, 1789.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I'll send you the email. You can put it online. So,
great.
So here's the conversation. So Mr. Sylvester said he had some doubts. Right. Remember, everybody's saying that the First Amendment was to abolish religion altogether or to keep it away from everything, right? So Mr. Jerry of Massachusetts said it would read better if it said that no religious doctrine shall be established by law. See the difference now? It's not no law respecting establishment of religion, but rather no religious doctrine shall be established, meaning that there's no difference, that we're not going to go with the Presbyterians or the Episcopalians or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mr. James Madison of Virginia said he apprehended the meaning of the words to be that Congress shall not establish a religion and enforce legal observation of it by law. So what it's saying, basically, Madison says, well, what it means is that we're not going to create a religion for you, and we're not going to enforce it like King George did.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In fact,
Yeah.
he continues, he says, the states seem to entertain an opinion that under the clause of the Constitution, it enabled Congress to make laws of such a nature as might establish a national religion. To prevent these effects, he presumed the amendment was intended. So he's saying that the amendment is intended that we don't have a national religion, that's all. Mr. Madison thought if the word national was inserted before religion, it would satisfy the minds of honorable gentlemen. He thought if the word national was introduced, it would point the amendment directly to the object that it was prevented to prevent.
Okay.
See, so the whole purpose of the First Amendment was that the United States would not establish a national religion. It would not. It had nothing to do with it being involved in religion or saying that you can't, or any sort. It doesn't. In fact, it never says anything about separation of church and state at all. In fact, the states had their own religions. So in state, if you take a state about the,
Yeah. It was funny in reading through some of your book. I wasn't aware of that some states are actually like, well, yes, we're Baptist or we're Presbyterian or we're whatever. I had no idea that was in the occurring at the time of the foundation. That was totally shocking to me.
So you see all these all these different states, and they have all their like some states were Catholic and some states were Episcopalian, and so what they didn't want is all these states were like worried that they didn't want the government to now come in and say, well, you can't be a Catholic state, you got to be a Protestant state or whatever. And so that was one of the primary purposes of this. But since then, we've taken this out of context and we said, oh, we can't have any religion in government. Well, that's kind of silly because the very founding document, the Declaration of Independence, calls out about the Creator. And if you don't have, let's go back to the Declaration of Independence. It says that, all men are what? Endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, right? And these, the life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and there's a whole bunch more that they talk about in there. But the basic thing that a lot of people think that the state gives us our rights. The state does not give us our rights. God gives us our rights. The state's job, and if you continue on the Declaration of Independence, it says, but to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, right? And basically that the purpose of the government is to protect the rights that we already have. Now, given all that, if you now take the Declaration of Independence, some people say, well, the Declaration of Independence has nothing to do with the Constitution. Well, if you look at the Constitution of the United States, it enumerates everything that it talks about in the Declaration of Independence. In fact, all the items of the Declaration of Independence are right there. The Declaration of Independence was signed by the founding fathers, so to speak. It was the first legal document of all the states. It was the source document for the Constitution. And in the Constitution, they protect rights. The Declaration of Independence, they tell you where the rights will come from. Now, if you take God out of the equation, then you don't have any rights.
Yeah.
Right? Because if the rights come from God and God goes away, you don't have any rights. And if you think about it, you can't have rights unless there's a God, unless you want the rights to come from the majority. But if the rights come from the majority, then you can't say slavery was wrong, because at the time slavery was around, the majority thought slavery was okay. In fact, if you polled the entire earth, you would find that 90% of the people liked slavery. Why? Because they weren't the slaves.
Exactly.
So if majority rules, then rights don't come, then you don't have any rights, really, because the majority decides what rights you have. You can't assign yourself rights. So I can't go around saying I'm emperor, so that's silly. The only way you could have rights is if somebody who has authority over all mankind said you had rights. Well, we believe that the only person who has authority over all mankind would be the Creator of all mankind, and that's exactly what the Declaration of Independence says.
Yeah.
So again, this is all in this, we're going through this really fast. It's again in the book, Jesus is Involved in Politics, Why Aren't You Wise in Your Church? And if your readers or your listeners are interested, you can go to JesusIsInvolvedInPolitics.com. JesusIsInvolvedInPolitics.com.
And I'm working through that book right now, actually, and it's been very informative. Like I said, I had no idea about the states having different congregational affiliations and things like that. And I just want to remind the listeners too that if you want to, you can call in. The call-in number is 215-383-3795. It is not toll-free, so just be aware of that if you do call in. So in your chapter on separation of church and state, oh, I'm sorry, we've already covered that. Some might say that so closely linking God, specifically the Christian God, to government would be implementing Christian Sharia, and how would you respond to that claim?
I'm sorry, say the last part again. I missed you.
So, like, if we specifically linked government to God, it would be like implementing Christian Sharia. What would you say to the claims of that?
And what's very interesting about that is if you look through the history of Christian governments past the Declaration of Independence. Actually, let's look at it before. If you look at Christian governments before, you've seen the tyrannical fear that people have, where the government is telling you what to do and how to believe and all that. And we don't, and we definitely don't want that. And it's a legitimate fear because of the Spanish Inquisition and things like that. However, let me be very, we should be very clear about what recent history shows. Recent history shows Christians want less government, not more. The only time we want government to interfere or intervene is to protect rights, not our feelings, not to provide us food, but to protect our rights. So let me explain that. You see, as I said, no Baptist wants a Baptist government. No Presbyterian wants a Presbyterian government. In fact, with due respect to our Catholic brothers and sisters, when the Spanish Inquisition came and destroyed many people, it was not, first of all, the Spanish Inquisition was not run by the church. It was run by the government in many cases. Right? It was the government's way of using the church, co-opting the church to do what they wanted, and the church should have fought against it more. And secondly, the people they were attacking were the people who are what we would call Baptists today. It was people who didn't want to follow the church. They wanted their own. They believed in Jesus. In fact, the Spanish Inquisition did not hurt anybody who was an atheist. Why? Because if you arrested an atheist and said, do you believe in God? And the atheist would say, hey, sure, I'll believe in God if you don't kill me, right? Because he has got nothing to lose by saying that. But if you go to a Christian and you say, do you believe in God? And the Christian says, which God are you talking about? Because I don't believe in this thing and that thing. I don't believe in Mary or something like that. He is worried that if he doesn't stand up for Jesus, he's going to go to hell. Right? So the person with a belief system that says, I'm going to go to hell if I don't stand up for truth, is at risk. But the person who says there is no hell, there is no heaven, is not at risk. Atheists are not at risk in a secular, in a theocratic society, because they can say, hey, I'll agree to whatever you want.
They don't have any foundational thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, my job is to get along. Now they could complain, no, but it's not right. I'm like, well, whose moral basis are you using at that point?
There you go.
If the moral basis is survival, then you should just survive, right?
It's funny that you keep coming back to morality, too, because I'm finding more and more that the more I think about these issues theologically and both philosophically, that the more argue is the foundation for so many, I would say the vast majority of objections to these conservative political Christian issues. Yeah.
And it does come back to morality. So I have to tell you, talking about morality, I'll tell you a little funny story here. I was on Facebook recently, and
what a coincidence! So was I.
And this guy, and I was talking about to this one. I was talking about this whole thing about religion and all that, and same-sex marriage. And he said, keep your religion and government out of my bedroom. What two consenting adults do in the privacy of their own home is their own business. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. Well, let me ask you this. Why does it have to be two? In fact, most people are arguing that it's only Christians that are saying it should be two, right? Muslims don't think it should be two. Hindus don't really have a compulsion against that. I said, in fact, most people, they want, they said, why two? Why not three? Why not five? It's Christians who said it should be two. Why are you talking about consensual sex? Until recently, until the Romans, consent was not necessary for sex. If you wanted to have sex and you were a powerful person, have sex with whoever you want. And I said, and why adults? In many cultures, they marry off kids, And it's only recently that we said, no, it needs to be, in fact, until Christians fought against child prostitution, child rape, child abuse, and all these things, and they passed laws against this, that it stopped being child, And then privacy, privacy, come on, if you go to a Gay Pride parade in San Francisco, it's all out in public, Come on, buddy, we're already in your bedroom with 4 laws right there. So get your own morality. If you're going to start spouting morality, get your own morality, because 4 of those laws you specified are all Christian laws.
Yeah.
So if you really want morality, then you have to understand there is a natural law, and the natural law is what Christians believe in. So it turns out there are 3 sources for the law, by the way. When we come back to it, there's 3 sources for moral law. One is the revealed law, and that is what we believe the Bible, right? So we believe that God revealed the law to us in the Bible, and this is what we consider the most fullest, most complete source of the law. The second one is what we call the conscience law. These are the self-evident laws. This is, it's in your heart. You understand good from bad. You can see it, although that can get corrupted easily over time, like with the Nazis and slavery and things like that. The last one is what we call the discovered law, and this is the natural law. So the discovered law, the problem with the discovered law, and so that is, by watching nature, and watching what hurts people, you can come up with the discovered law. The problem with the discovered law is you can't find it out until people get hurt. And so you want to try to stop with the revealed law. You want to take the revealed law and say, that makes sense, let's follow that. But people don't want to do that, so they end up running headfirst into the discovered law, and that's pain. And my daughter, my daughter's 5 years old, and we teach her the different ways to learn. And I said, honey, you can do a hearing experience where you hear the law, and you hear it and you obey it, or you can have an owie experience, where you get hurt. And you don't want an owie experience because the owie experience hurts, but then you realize what you shouldn't do. And, to her, she said, yeah, that's right. Owie experience would be if I ran across the street and a car hit me. That would be an owie. I said, yeah, hopefully you'll never experience that. She goes, no. So now she never crosses the street, without somebody holding her hand. The other day, she was told, hey, you can't eat this cookie in the living room. You got to leave it in the kitchen because it'll get crumbs all over the place. Well, she disobeyed, and she had an owie experience because she ate in the living room and crumbs were all over the place. And so we were cleaning up, and she was cleaning up, and I said, there's an owie experience. She said, yeah. So you want to obey the revealed law and not the owie law, if you will. But that's the reality. Well, a lot of what people are doing, what we're doing in our nation, if we start legislating God's laws that are not the revealed law or not closer to the revealed law, then we're going to run into the discovered law. And we've done that, and we've done that with so many cases. We are doing that with marriage and divorce. Jesus said, I hate divorce. God hates divorce. And yet we allowed some things like no-fault divorce to go through, and now we see the decimation of our culture through divorce. I'm not saying divorce should never happen, and I'm not here to condemn anybody who's had a divorce. And I know there are many single moms whose husbands have left them, or they've made mistakes in the past, and they're really fighting to keep their kids in line. But the biggest the people who got hurt from divorce, from us not obeying the revealed law and running into the Howie law, if you will, are the kids, because it turns out that only 29% of all kids come from broken homes, yet 70, and I'm doing this from memory here, but we have it more accurately in the book documented, 70% of all rapists come from broken homes. 75% of all criminals come from broken homes.
Well, and let me tell you, as a school teacher, and certainly that this is not a universal 100% accurate rule, but in general, children who come from broken families tend not to either adjust to school or perform as well as their peers who do come from a unified family. Again, I'm not trying to insult anyone by saying that. That's just something
but again,
I've noticed.
What you're saying is the statistical evidence is
exactly,
that. So when I say 75% of all broken kids, criminals come from broken homes, that doesn't mean 100% of all broken home kids end up criminals. What it means is that more criminals are produced from that system, and there are, as I said, there are single parents who are valiantly fighting to avoid that, and I want to honor them
Absolutely.
Knowing the situation that they're in and what they're up against. But they have an uphill battle there. And so we see this, and this is how we experience our nation has experienced. In fact, the single correlation to crime in any city is not the economic standard of the city, but the number of broken homes, single-parent family homes, and broken divorced homes in that city. And we see that over and over again. Even in England, they did a study, and they found that even if you took a rich neighborhood with more broken homes, the crime rate was higher in that neighborhood than if you took a poor neighborhood with more intact homes.
Wow. That's fascinating. I had not heard that. Huh.
Yeah, that's in the book. You'll get to it.
Okay. so just to summarize so far, I'm just teach some of these can help. So just to summarize so far, it sounds like what you're saying is that culture largely today views separation of church and state as religion can have no association, no affiliation, no impact whatsoever on any aspect of government affairs. That's the pop culture definition. Is that pretty accurate so far?
Yeah.
And then the meaning behind the original meaning, the original intent with separation of church and state was actually that the government should not be able to establish a nationwide religion nor interfere in the free practice of that religion unless religion
it violates
the natural law. Exactly. Okay,
yep,
so
absolutely.
Just clarifications. Okay.
Yeah, and there's also another thing that we forget. If Christians had not gotten involved in the laws of their nations or their monarchies or their dictatorships, all these things would still be legal. Infanticide, child marriage, temple prostitution, child prostitution, the superstitious killing of twins, killing widows, women as second-class citizens, bribery, death games, gladiatorial combat. All these things were only made illegal because Christians got involved with their politicians and said, this is a law that needs to be made. And so if tomorrow Christians were to abandon the political realm, if we were to say, you know what, we should not be involved in politics, let whatever happens in the government happen in the government, well, guess what? We'll go back to Nazi Germany, which is exactly what happened when Hitler, who, by the way, was not a Christian, people think he was. In fact, there's a paper on the web that I can send you that shows that his plan was to kill all Christians right after he killed all the Jews. In fact, it's well documented.
Wow.
Hitler told all the preachers, hey, look, we'll take care of the government, you take care of the church. You stay out of the government's business.
Yeah.
And you saw what happened. Why? Because the government is not, the church needs to be the moral conscience of government. We don't want the church to run the government, just as I said. I don't want a Catholic government. I don't want a Protestant government. I don't want a Baptist government, right? But we want the church to be the moral conscience of the government. But guess what? All laws are based on moral values. We only legislate morality. If somebody says we don't legislate morality, you ask them to show you one law that's not based on a moral value. I always like to make suggestions. How about the law against stealing? Oh, no, that's a moral value. How about the law against killing? Oh, no, that's a moral value. How about the law against speeding? Oh, well, the reason there's a law against speeding is because it will kill somebody. Oh, okay, that's a moral value. How about the law about stopping at the stop sign? Oh, that's a moral value because it'll kill somebody. How about the contract law? Oh, that's a moral value. You shouldn't steal. You shouldn't be dishonest. You shouldn't lie. Give me one single law that's not based on a moral value. You can't find one. And so all laws are based on moral values. The question is, whose moral values do you want to use? Yours, mine, Hitler's, or Mother Teresa's? And I would say none of them.
And we get back into relativism. Yeah,
we get back. Our laws should be based on the laws of nature and on nature's God, because that's a moral objective truth. And by the way, moral objective truths are far more stable than physical truths are. Because think about this. If there was no universe, and people were kind of, before there was any universe, 1 + 1 was always equal to 2, right? It didn't come into being with the universe. You can prove that easily, and I have another book called Who's Agent X, showing that science and logic, proving science and logic show it's more rational to think God exists. But in that book, we talk about how these truths are transcendent. They exist before the existence of the universe. Well, moral laws exist before the existence of the universe, because you don't need a universe for it to be wrong to lie to somebody.
Yeah. Well, we have someone here in our chat room who's brought up something. I was just hoping that you could comment on it.
Sure.
Arc Studies here is saying it's not that you can't make a law based on a moral value. It's that you can't legislate morality. They're two different things.
I don't know what that means. I don't know the difference there.
Yeah.
If you can't legislate morality, then how can I not legislate against killing somebody?
Yeah.
That's morality. I think that's semantics there. I don't think it's irrelevant. I fail to see his point. Maybe if he can elaborate on it, but no, we legislate morality all the time. The question is, whose morality?
What is the basis for those legislations?
Yeah, what's the basis for that moral value, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So
now, we don't legislate. If he's talking about, well, you don't legislate "thou shalt not kill." No, we don't legislate those words, but we legislate the basis of those words is that murder is illegal, right? You know.
So, and something that, too, if you could just talk about for a moment, like when we look back at like the French Revolution, for example, something that was founded more on an atheistic thing, or more on an atheistic philosophy, what ends up happening? What ends up being the result of that?
Well, the French Revolution was based on reason or rationality. Now, if it was true rationality, I'd have no problems with it because I think rationality leads itself right to moral law and natural law.
Absolutely.
In fact, the motto for our ministry, No Blind Faith, which is noblindfaith.com, is theology, apologetics, relationship, rational faith. And our publishing arm is a Rational Free Thinker, or Rational Free Press, right? So we believe in rationality, but the problem with the French Revolution is it went to rationality with no allegiance to keeping that rationality. So when Robespierre decided that he didn't like somebody, he would just kill him, right? Because it was rational for him to eliminate the people he didn't like. And so the French Revolution ended up killing something like 40,000 people, just executing them. The French Revolution probably killed more people than the monarchy that they were trying to replace. You know, and they also did a couple of other really interesting, silly things. They tried to go to a 10-day week. I don't know if you know this. It is a very interesting side note. They tried to go to a 10-day. They wanted to go to a decimal week, right? Well, what happened is, and if you think about it, it makes sense.
What did they do with those extra 5 days?
People were going to where the idea was you'd work for 7 days and then you'd get 3 days off, right? It sounds like a great idea, but for some reason people started getting sick. People started, productivity went down, and it's like you're only working an extra 2 days, right?
Yeah.
You know, you're instead of 5 days, you're working 7 days, and then you're getting 3 days off. It would seem, because they thought it would be more efficient. But people started getting sick, and finally they had to abandon it completely and go back to the 7-day week, which, strangely enough, comes from Genesis, but okay, you know.
It's funny how things work in order when you follow Scripture.
Exactly. Yeah. There's another revealed law kind of thing.
Exactly. So why, in this country right now, why do you think there's such animosity specifically towards Christians when promoting their own personal religious views in the political arena?
Well, it's because we've forgotten where we came from and we've allowed the media. The media has major sway in us, and that's something we need to take back. We need to take back the culture in the media.
Yeah, one needs only to watch the lack of coverage by MSNBC on the committee.
Exactly. Yeah, you know, I loved how on the Republican National Convention they had all these minorities and women and all that speaking, and none of the major networks broadcast a single minority. So if you went in there, you'd think that Marco Rubio, because they had to have him on because he was introducing Mitt Romney. You would think Marco Rubio was the only minority in the entire Republican Party, right? And in fact, they had Condoleezza Rice. They didn't show her. They had Mia Love, who is the mayor, and she's African American. They had a slew of women and a slew of African Americans. They would have had an Indian, but Bobby Jindal was busy. Yay, Indians!
Good for the home team.
Yeah. Although now I'm an American, so.
So Neil, we have a caller on the line here, and I have no way of screening, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute here.
We'll take our chance.
We'll take the caller here. So, caller, go ahead. You are on the air.
How you doing? Thank you for taking my call.
Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Through loud there.
Okay. Well, I'm Art Studies in your room. I'm the one that put the comment that you can make. It's not that you. I was listening to what you guys were saying.
Yeah. Please elaborate, because I don't mean to diss you without understanding your point. So let me understand your point.
And I didn't take it that way. The difference is, what I put in there was, it's not that you can't make a law based on moral value, it's that you can't legislate morality. And what I mean by that is that you can't legislate morality. If you could legislate morality, there would be no rapes, there would be no murders, there would be
I understand what you mean. Yeah.
There would be none of those things. Whenever I hear the whole focus on the legislation of moral values, more often than not, it's a pretext. And I'm just looking at the premise of you guys here in your posts up there or at the top of your page, the whole idea of Jesus and politics. I have no problem with politics, and I am a Christian apologist. I run the Apologetic Research Center, in fact. But I don't think that it is the Christian duty to fight political battles. And whenever I hear people talking about that, it's always based upon what the Founding Fathers said or what someone else said, but it's never based on the Word of God, because the Word of God is explicit on that point, that that's not what we're here to do.
Well, okay, let me ask you this. So you don't think we should have gotten involved in the battle against slavery? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying I absolutely agree. And I'm a black man. I think that it was something that was moral to do in the world. But the battle we are fighting is not for moral correction of the world. We are in the battle for souls. Now, I vote, so I don't want you to think that I'm extremist.
No, I understand that, yeah.
Based upon my socio-economic condition. But had I been born in slavery, and Scripture speaks to this point, in fact, the book of Philemon identifies Paul sending a slave back.
Right. And saying what? And saying what? Treat him as a brother.
Yeah, but you know what? He's telling, you're right. He's telling Philemon, treat him as a brother. But guess what? What if Philemon didn't? He still sent him back to slavery.
Yeah. Now, what kind of slavery was that, though? Do you know what kind of slavery that was?
Again,
it was bond servant. It was a bond servant. You're familiar with the bond slaver. I'm sure you're into apologetics, right? So he was a bond slave, which meant that he was paying off a debt.
All right. So
it's not the slavery based on. It's not the slavery that we think about. But I want to go back to that, because I think this is a side issue.
One thing I would also
slavery, I think, is a side issue. Let me focus on. Hang on a second. Let me focus more on. So you say that we should not have gotten involved in the battle against slavery. We should not have gotten in the battle against animal cruelty, temple prostitution, child labor, all these things. But let me go one step further. Should we or should we not get in the battle against the freedom of speech for the church?
Okay. Now, to answer your question, I don't. See, you're having a philosophical. You made a point about the Word of God where Onesimus was a bond slave. What's your reference for that?
Well, I want to come back to that later, and I think we should take that offline, because I think there's a more important point here, and that is the Christians' involvement in politics, right? Now, so you're saying, are you suggesting, because you said that you disagreed with the slavery movement? Am I right in hearing that? Or did I misunderstand?
Slavery is an evil. Again,
taking so we should not have gotten involved in imposing our morality on that, right?
I'm trying to answer you. Okay, Philemon is off the table because you made a point that's not verified, so it's not valid at this point from the Word of God. Because I will never say make a point from the Word of God that I won't give you a reference for. All right, so let's take that off the table. As far as the morality of slavery, I can tell you, it is immorally wrong. It is wicked. It is evil. But the Word of God gives us clear course for what it is we are to do here. We're not here. The battle that we're fighting here could mean that we can lose our lives, our freedom, all of those things. And a piece of paper does not prevent me from proclaiming the Word of God. If someone says don't proclaim the Word of God,
but okay, so specifically,
the Word of God anyway.
Yes, you would be thrown into prison and you would be arrested, and you think that's a better situation. Now, because here's the way I'm looking at it. First of all,
it doesn't matter about
what
the situation. Because I clarified that before. It doesn't matter whether it's a better situation than I would do as Paul did. I would preach in prison.
Okay. Now, you realize that the reason America has been so effective in spreading the Word of God is because of the freedoms we have in this nation. Do you know America is the biggest sending and biggest funding missions nation? And I know that because I've experienced that living and growing up in Africa, right? So what you're suggesting is that we should stay in our churches, we should hide like the Romans did when the Christians were making their big move.
It's not fair.
Why? No. I'm saying if we don't get involved in legislating morality and stopping the evil, how there's so many. It's like a target-rich environment. I don't know where to go.
Then let's have back and forth in this target-rich. First of all, Christianity existed in Africa for 1,000 years before the first Christian missionary from outside of Africa went there. So I don't know why we feel like if we don't export American Christianity that somehow it's not there. It was there 1,000 years. In fact, the missionaries called it the Dark Continent. It was there 1,000 years. Many believe the Ethiopian eunuch is the one who brought it back there. So the whole idea that America in the last 200 years has spread Christianity, it hasn't been anywhere else, undermines what all those who have died through the centuries have done in the name of Christ.
That's not true at all. That's not true at all. First of all, we come from a church. Our family traces its heritage back. It's a Mar Thoma church in India. Traces its heritage back to 51 A.D. when St. Thomas came. But telling you back as a local Indian, I will tell you that the church in America has funded some of the biggest outreaches of missionaries in India. Okay, because there's a lot of things that, you could say the Mar Thoma Church, we're only 3% of India. So for when the American church, now there's a lot of problems that the American churches bring in too, but these are things that we can work out. The funding of missions across the world by Americans has exploded. Do you know that Africa is now, for the thousands of years that you're talking about, Africa remained a very low percentage of Christians. Now you can look and you can say entire nations are Christians. Uganda is Christian. You've seen, Nigeria is half
South
Christian.
Sudan, I think so.
South Sudan is Christian. And South Sudan is predominantly there. And my dad, who actually taught in South Sudan, he started in Juba, he started the Christian seminary, something like Pentecostal Christian seminary there. And, and it was funded by American money, I tell you that. It's just amazing for me, for people to think that American influence has not had this huge effect on the Word of God. Now this will all stop overnight and the Koreans will have to take over. The South Koreans are doing a very good job, by the way, and the Chinese are going to have to take over. But if persecution comes to America, that will stop here. But again, I want to move away from that because I think that I'll let you have the last word on that, and then I want to move to a different topic because I think this is great.
Okay.
Go ahead.
If you'll let me have the last word. I don't know where this whole idea that persecution would stop the gospel when the church is born out of the blood of the martyrs. There's been no greater persecution of Christianity than in the first century, in the second century, and yet the church flourished because God's behind it. So this whole idea that our organization, just because we want to export American Christianity as if somehow that's how the gospel is spread, I believe is wrong. And again, the point I was making was, at no point did you again, the Word of God does not support the whole political thing. There's not. I can actually show where it's contrary to that. In fact, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 4, no man who wars, and all Christians battle not against flesh and blood, no man who wars entangles himself with the affairs of this life to please him who's called him to be a soldier. And that's just one passage. It's full of that.
Okay, Ark, I'm going to have to go ahead and end the conversation there, but thank you for your call. I appreciate it.
That.
And we welcome you back anytime. Take care.
So I'm going. Let me answer the last couple of things. I did give him the last word, but then he brought up a new fact, which I need to counteract. So he talked about persecution about the church. The problem with persecution of the church is, the church will grow in America, but as I say in my book, I say, where are we going to run to? You see, the Roman church, when the Jews were persecuted, they spread all over the world. But now there's no place to go to. this is the last stand on earth. We're not going to, you guys aren't going to run to India. We may have to run to China, but if persecution comes here, there's no place to go to. We've filled the world. So right now you can't go to a Muslim country, you can't. So this is a I don't think that's going to be a solution. And besides, I don't think people who ask for persecution understand persecution. In the extended version of my book, I answer this objection particularly. I spend almost 30 pages documenting persecution in other countries, and I said, you really want this to happen to your kids? And I think it's a very dangerous thing to say. Oh yeah, let's get persecution to the church because it'll make the church better. Why not obey God's moral laws and bring it there? And again, the other part of it is, he talks about he talks about Timothy, but there's so many passages that counter that, where Jesus actually is involved in politics himself. Right?
Well, and the one, sorry, I was just going to say, passage that just really comes to mind for me is Proverbs 25:26, and I'm reading out of the NLT just because I think it's a little easier for my brain to comprehend sometimes. And it says, "If the godly give in to the wicked, it's like polluting a fountain or muddying a spring." To me, that really kind of brings the point home of that, hey, we should stand for righteousness, and I think I personally believe that the political system is a great tool for us to use as long as we use it in a holy and righteous way.
Yeah, and for, so again, it always surprises me when people don't want to get involved in politics because they're saying, he says, well, it wasn't our business to stop slavery. Well, it was our business to stop slavery. It wasn't our business to stop child molestation. Well, it was our business. Why? Because we're supposed to love our neighbors. The Bible talks about rights. In fact, there are 6 passages in the Bible that talks about rights. The Bible cares about rights. God cares about rights because He talks about the rights of the oppressed, the rights of the widows, the rights of the orphans, the rights of the innocent. He talks about all those things, and these are all biblical issues. And you can go through, and he talks about don't get involved in the local. When in 1 Timothy, I think. You've got to look at that in context, and I don't think it applies to the context he's talking about. So I want to talk briefly about Jesus being involved in politics.
Yeah, go ahead. We have about 2.5 minutes left, so just whatever you can fit into that time's fine.
Yeah. So again, all the stuff is available on our website, JesusIsInvolvedInPolitics.com, and I love the interaction with that gentleman because it allows me to think about, okay, what are people objecting to, and what are the issues they're objecting to, and so the thing about Jesus being involved in politics, a lot of us think, well, he didn't get involved in Roman politics. Well, that's because he wasn't a Roman citizen. He was a Jewish citizen, and the Jews actually had a legislative system much like ours. They had a Torah, which was their constitution, and they could legislate laws below it, and they had a council of elders and members who, there were 71 of them that sat in a semicircle, and they would legislate these lower value laws. Well, what was their name? Well, they were called the Sanhedrin. Well, who were the members of the Sanhedrin? Well, they were the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And you see now that Jesus was involved with the Pharisees and the Sadducees on a daily basis. And what was he telling them? He was talking to them about the law. He says, you have neglected the most important parts of the law. What? Mercy, justice, and faithfulness. Well, mercy is part of the law, how you legislate punishments. Justice is a very important part of the law, right? Jesus is involved in that. And then faithfulness. Well, what is he talking about faithfulness? Faithfulness to the people? Faithfulness to God? Well, no, he's talking about faithfulness to the law. Jesus was what we would call a strict constructionalist. He said, go back to the original intent of the law, and that whole passage where he talks about the Sabbath was made for man, not man made for the Sabbath. So it's very interesting when you get people say, no, we should absolve ourselves, stay away from the law, we should not be involved in that, and there's just no good reason for that to be the case. And I've seen over and over again countries where Christians look at Nigeria, Christians abandoned the law for so long, and now they're realizing, hey, we're going to be taken over by Sharia law. And for somebody to just sit there and let this horrible persecution come upon you, when all you have to do is get involved in the law, and guess what? When you get involved in the law and legislate God's laws, you will have a happier, healthier, safer, and better thing. And how unloving can we be not to want to legislate God's laws for mankind? And the last part he did mention, I didn't get a chance to address this. He said, well, I can't stop slavery by stop rape by legislating against rape. No, but as Martin Luther King says, the law may not force people to do certain things, but it will prevent a lot of people from doing it. See, so in other words, we have a law against murder. Does that mean we stop all murders? No. Does that mean we shouldn't have a law against murder? No. And so that, I think, is very important, that we legislate this morality whenever we can.
Yep. Neil, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And again, go ahead and visit noblindfaith.org. Is it .org or .com? .noblindfaith.com. And also pick up a copy of Neil's book, Is Involved in Politics, The Only Way to a Happier, Healthier, Safer, and Mutually Prosperous America. So again, thanks for your time. And just a little show note, I will not be doing a live show next week. I will have to upload it, but I will be doing a fascinating interview with the guest Christopher Pritchard, who at one time was actually convicted of assisting in the murder of his stepfather, but has now repented and become a believer. So make sure to tune in next week. And until then, stand for truth and reach the lost. God bless.